let's get right into it. Luke Johnson, New Orleans Saints beat writer, is on now. Luke, can you hear me?
Scott, I got you loud and clear.
Oh, God. Man, it's been one of those kind of mornings. I'm happy you got me, man. You get to kick off the show today at like 7:33. So sorry to make you wait, man, but I appreciate you taking the time. We're going to talk, obviously, Saints with you, but a combined no-hitter in the World Series, just a shutout. It's seemingly every game except the first one, but the first one just, a bunch of runs from one team early and then shut out the rest of the way. Is this one of the more like odd, just strange World Series that you can remember?
Yeah. I think one of my favorite things about the baseball postseason is it just seems like every year, every game is just like soaked in drama, right? And we got that in game one and have not had it since. It's kind of taken some of the life out of it. I mean, I think the game three win by Philly when they just kept hitting homers in front of that crowd that hasn't seen a World Series game in a long time, I thought that was pretty cool. But, yeah, for a sport that's like trying to kind of find its way back into the national conversation, it's kind of been a dud so far, even with a no-hitter yesterday.
Yeah, it was like I kind of started watching the Pelicans at 9:30. I didn't catch the end of it, but knowing it wasn't going to be a single pitcher doing the whole thing, I don't know. It didn't feel all that. I mean, if a single player has a no-hitter, it's electric. When a team does it, it's kind of like annoying. And I get why they did it. It's the World Series. I'm not criticizing them for doing it, but a team combined for a no-hitter is kind of like I'll forget about it, the next day. Player does it in the World Series. Now, shoot, you're immortal in sports. But team does it like, oh yeah, remember that weird series between the Astros and Phillies? Oh, and there was that one game where that happened. Wait, did that happen? That's kind of what this series feels like it's going to be in like 5-10 years when we look back at it. Yeah,
I totally agree. It takes away from it being special. It is still technically a no-hitter. But no-hitters belong to individuals, I think, and it's an individual person accomplishment. When you got like 3 or 4 or 5 guys combining on it, it's less notable, and maybe that shouldn't be the case. I don't know, but I think I always remember that Roy Halladay pitched a no-hitter in a postseason game, and I don't think I'll really truly remember this as that,
Yeah, no question about it. Luke Johnson, our guest, 103.3 The GOAT, simulcast on 1420. It's the Great Scott Show. So the Saints, Luke, where did that come from on Sunday?
I mean, I feel like that's the team we've been waiting to see all year, right? It just so happened that we didn't see it until week 8. How strange, I don't really know how to describe it or how to explain it. But I think everybody after that game was saying this is the team we're capable of being, and it's like, yeah, I agree with you. It's just I don't understand why it took you so long, because all the problems that have been just kind of sinking their season over and over and over again were all problems that you expected to be fixable problems, right? It wasn't like a talent issue. It was turnovers and penalties and just things that are just get in the way of good teams and success. And they cut out the turnovers. They only had one egregious penalty, and they were able to overcome that. And next thing you know, they're shutting the team out. They're finally getting pressure out of their front four for the first time all year, and they're winning by 24 points. I think that's like the Raiders aren't a good team, right? But I think that's what the Saints are capable of doing. They're capable of beating the snot out of bad teams, and they're capable of beating good teams. But I don't think you can reasonably say that this is the expectation for them moving forward until they show they can do it more than one time in 8 games.
Bingo. I mean, I know the word swagger is thrown around so much, and the Saints are partly responsible for that because Alvin Kamara likes to use the term, and You know what? It's Alvin Kamara. He can use whatever term he wants. But a lot of players after the game were like, yeah, we kind of found our swagger. And Kamara's like, nah, it's consistency. We got to do this. And that's kind of what I've been telling fans. Like, I wasn't expecting it based on everything we had seen this season to that point. And it was nice to see. But I need to see more of it. And I don't think that it's going to take, I think Lamar Jackson's going to cross the 50 on Monday night. I'm not expecting that against Baltimore. But I don't know, just sometimes, Luke, just the simple things, right? The effort, the tackling from the secondary, a pass rush from the front four, something that we just had not seen in, the early portion of this. I hope at some point we see it from the special teams, because that's an area that we thought was going to be really good this year that's been extremely disappointing when you just base it off of expectations. I'm really hoping that they put it together as well, because a listener was like, oh, I see what you're saying, Scott. You're not saying they're a bad team. You're just saying there was a disconnect. I'm like, no, what I've said up until Sunday was that the Saints were a team that had a lot of talent, but were a bad football team. Now, on Sunday, they weren't. On Sunday, they were absolutely dominant. You've got the talent there, but can you carry it over? Can you continue it? I think Monday night is, for me, Monday night kind of feels like a measuring stick in a lot of ways.
Yeah, you're at home. You're coming off a good win. You got an extra day. You might be getting some of these injured players back. We'll see today when they go up for practice, but I wouldn't be surprised if I saw, like, Jarvis Landry back out there.
Yep.
Maybe Adam Troutman. I think they have an opportunity here to really show who they are. Baltimore is a good team, but Baltimore hasn't been dominant. Baltimore's blown a number of 20-point leads this year. I don't think that the Saints are just going to get walked all over as long as they play their game. But, if they go back in there and they turn the ball over 3 times again and they have a really, really hard time containing a caliber of player, the type of player they've struggled against historically, I could see us right back in the same spot we were in 2 weeks ago. They've got to figure out how to play their brand of football. And I think the Saints brand of football, right, if you're looking just at their history, and a lot of this was under Sean Payton, obviously, but they're a team that does not make mistakes on offense, and then they squeeze the life out of a team on defense, right? That's a really, really good combination. If you got an offense that is efficient and doesn't turn the ball over, doesn't give away points, and then you just play pretty good to great defense on the other side of the ball, you're going to win a lot of football games. And that's exactly what the Saints were. And it's exactly who they were not in the first 7 games of the season. So, I think that's what the conversation was about last week when they were talking about rediscovering their swagger. It was more like, hey, this is how we've played for a long time. This is not how we've played this season. Let's figure out how to get back to where we were, because that's how we win games.
Luke Johnson, our guest, at Luke Johnson on Twitter, at BY Luke Johnson. Give him a follow. Check out all his stuff. Alontae Taylor, Luke, the rookie, was tremendous on Sunday. He stood out for all the right reasons, I think. He doesn't lack confidence, which is important when you play cornerback. But overall, with Lattimore coming back at some point, what kind of role do you see Alontae Taylor kind of having moving forward?
I think he's going to be on the field some way, shape, or form. He's pretty good. I just don't know what that's going to look like yet, because I don't think I ever recall, maybe early last year, seeing Paulson Adebo play any slot. And Alontae Taylor was hurt for most of training camp. He didn't play in a single preseason game. He never even saw the field for a defensive snap until week 2 against Tampa, when he was thrust onto the field because Marshawn Lattimore got ejected. And then he goes on IR for another 4 weeks. So we don't see him again until, they got a bunch more injuries and he's out there starting again. So we've only seen him on the outside. We've really only seen Paulson Adebo on the outside. We have no idea if either of them can be like an effective slot defender. But I think they're going to try one of them there because I don't think you'd take either of them off the field right now. And I know Adebo struggled earlier this year, but I really think people need to give him a pass on that. He was outstanding in training camp. He looked like he was about to be a superstar, and then he hurt his ankle. I think he came back a little bit too soon from that. I think he's going to be very, very good. I think they are set up for the future at that position 100%. I just don't know who's going to be playing where. That's the only thing I can't answer, but I will very confidently say they're going to get all three of those guys in the field.
Peyton Turner had his best game as a pro by far. We talked about consistency. You want to see more of it. You know, you've gotten to see him a little bit in practice. You've talked to him. I think by any measuring stick, he has been, in terms of performance and expectation, a disappointment thus far in his career. I don't think that's unfair to say. He was a first-round pick. Do you think Sunday was a flash in the pan, or is it something he's going to build on? And I know that's kind of ultimately the question about the entire game, but specifically about him. I mean, I know you've gotten to talk to him a little bit.
Yeah, that's a really tough one to answer because, I think for 2 straight years now, I've seen that guy in training camp, and I'm just like, he's going to be a stud, right? He's going to be a monster. And then he gets hurt, and then when he gets on the field, he doesn't really do much. Or like if you remember last year, his debut last year against the Panthers in Week 2, the Saints got hammered in that game, but Peyton Turner was awesome. He had like 5 tackles and like a sack and a half, and like 2 tackles for loss and like 20 snaps or something like that. He's great. It was like, oh man, they really found somebody. And then he got hurt, and then, the other 4 or 5 games he was on the field, he, didn't do anything. So I guess what I'm saying here is I've always known that he has the ability to be like a game wrecker, right? I mean, you see it in practices. You see it just in his physical attributes. And, people who are listening are probably like, yeah, it sounds a lot like Marcus Davenport. And they're kind of at the same stage, yep. Right? 2 guys who are physical freaks who have all the ability in the world. You're just waiting on them to put it together, and you're waiting on them to be healthy. And I just feel like they're kind of in the same boat. And I feel like Davenport, you could say the same thing for him. I think he had his first good game of the year last week.
No doubt. Right?
It didn't come through in the form of sacks. But he's been an incredibly disappointing player through the first 7 games of the season. I think they when you look at some of their struggles defensively, I think you can pin a lot of it on their front 4 not getting after the passer. And you get big games out of Turner and Davenport, and David Onyemata got in there for a sack. He's been MIA the entire season. I think you see the results. Derek Carr could not complete a pass to save his life. They shut down the run game, and then they shut down the pass game because their front 4 was awesome. And because their front 4 was getting after the passer, they were able to get their hands on some balls in the secondary, which that was another thing they couldn't do all season. I think they were like second to last in the NFL in passes defense coming into that game. I think they got 8 of them in that game. So, those 2 guys, Turner and Davenport, are so important to what they do. And they need them to play like that, or they need them to play something close to that. Because whatever they were getting for the first 7 games, whether it was Turner missing time or Davenport just, not being who you were expecting him to be, I think that had a huge negative impact on their defense.
Luke Johnson, our guest, Grave Scott Show, 103.3 The GOAT simulcast on 1420. The offensive line, Luke, is an area that we talk about sample size and needing to see more, from what the Saints did on the D-line, in the secondary, and a number of other areas on Sunday to kind of be believers. But I think the offensive line has a larger sample size that makes you say, okay, I think, we can be believers here. I mean, you know how good Ramczyk is. Getting Andrus Peat back was huge. Cesar Ruiz has really this season just turned what seems like a giant corner. He's gone from, probably the weakest link on the O-line to a really big strength. I think for the Saints, if you want to start hanging your hat on something and say, okay, this is an area where they've excelled and we have enough evidence. Are you with me? Do you feel like we have enough evidence now to kind of praise the O-line a little bit and say, good job, guys, you're making a huge difference here?
Yeah, 100%. I agree with you, by the way, on Andres Pete. He's a guy who has, him and Ruiz, to be frank, have just been the target of so many barbs from the fan base on social media or whatever the case may be. I think you saw the difference between what their offense can be this week with Andres in there versus what it was with Calvin Throckmorton in there. I think there's a huge difference between those guys as players. I don't think that I'll ever go back and say handing Andres Pete, $10 million a year after nobody else signed him in free agency was a move I would have made. But yeah, I think he's played pretty well this year when he's been on the field. It's been really good to see, and I think their offensive line, generally speaking, has played at a very high level for basically the last 6 weeks. Like, first 2 weeks were pretty rough. I think they were figuring stuff out with Jameis in there. I think Jameis contributed to that. But 11 sacks for 2 weeks was pretty bad. And since then, I think they've only given up 6 or 7 sacks in the 6 games since. And they've obviously just been opening up massive holes in the ground game. Those guys are and have been kind of a linchpin to their offensive success for a long time now. And you see it. You see the difference between what a good offensive line or good offensive line play can make to a team when you watch teams like Tampa Bay, who are just absolutely crumbling on offense this year because they are getting substandard offensive line play. Saints are getting really good offensive line play, and it's allowing Andy Dalton to look way better than Tom Brady as a quarterback with fewer weapons. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's really, really, really important. I think it's kind of driving the Saints' offensive success right now. Those guys the ground game has been super important to what the Saints have done, and the Saints have, they've schemed up some really nice things with Taysom Hill, and Rashid Shaheed got that big run. Yeah, some of it is smart play calling, but a lot of it is just that offensive line taking over at times. They got a bunch of athletes out there in that zone running game, and you put Alvin Kamara behind them, and I think that it's all worked out really well for them.
No question about it, man. And I think the number one reason they dominated on Sunday was because they did it in the trenches on both sides of the ball. That was the key. You have a challenge coming up Monday night. We both agree it's kind of a measuring stick game, and if you're a team that's been disappointing to this point, and the Saints have, and I think they'd all admit that to you. I mean, they have admitted it. Kind of being in a lousy division helps a little bit, but I still think the focus at this point, and I'm speaking more to fans maybe than the team, it needs to be on the Saints and improving the areas and kind of. I remember in 2014, Luke, and you were covering. I think you were still here covering the Cajuns at the time, but I heard from so many listeners, "Oh, it's all right. The South is so awful, and the Saints will still win it." And I'm like, they're not. I don't care what the expectation was coming into the season. There's a lot of stuff here that they got to fix, and it doesn't look fixable. Carolina ended up winning the division that year at 7-8-1. They didn't have a winning record. They ended up winning a playoff game. It helped that Arizona had to play a backup in the playoff game, but you win the division, you get in the playoffs, and maybe win again, whatever. My point is, it doesn't matter how bad the division is. If the Saints improve, that's a win. And if they improve and happen to win a lousy division and get to host the playoff game, then that's awesome. That's kind of extra. But you're only 8 games into this thing. And I hear a lot of folks talking about the playoffs and the division, and there's still a shot and this and that and the other. I'm like, let's just see what they do Monday night,
Yeah. I agree. And I think if they play well Monday night, right, and if they show that they are capable of stringing together a couple good games, approaching what they did Sunday. I think it's unreasonable to expect what they did Sunday every game from here on out, right? But if they can go into a game and like, look, they didn't turn the ball over against Cincinnati. They almost won that game because they made the most out of their offensive possessions. Now, they didn't finish all of them off. They had 4 red zone trips end up in field goals. That's why they lost that game. But they were competitive against a pretty good football team. I think that's the most important thing in my eyes. And that's why Andy Dalton is starting quarterback. I know he had the 3 interceptions against Arizona. I think 2 of those probably can be explained away. But that's so important, I think, if they're able to go into this game and just not turn the ball over and see what happens after that. And if they play a competitive game here, if they win the game, which is possible, I don't think it's likely, but I think it's possible, then you can start talking about, okay, what is possible for this team this year? Like, what can they be if they're able to consistently string together good performances? But if they go out there and they lay an egg and they look like the team they were the first 7 games of the season, then it's hard to have those conversations because that is consistently who they are. So look, prove it to me, and then we can have the conversations about what's going to happen later in the year.
No doubt. Luke Johnson has been our guest. Got started a little late this morning. We need to let him run, but before I do, any recommended viewing? I know it's football season and you're busy as I'll get at. I don't know how much TV you've been able to watch, but any shows out there you're recommending right now?
Oh man, well, as you know from our previous conversations, I had a huge backlog. So I'll just kind of go through. I really, really loved the last season of The Boys. I thought it was great.
It was great. It was great.
The last season of Stranger Things was epic. A big commitment time-wise, but I think probably my favorite one so far. I'm currently working my way through the latest season of Peaky Blinders.
Yeah, I haven't watched that yet, any of it. Now, it's on my list at some point. It's probably going to be like a next summer type of thing, but I've been hearing about it for years. It's loaded with people that I enjoy their work. I mean, what the Luke scale, right? 1 to 10. What 10 being the best? What are you giving Peaky Blinders?
I give it a really solid 7. Look, you'll love it specifically because it's central to the storyline is a guy and what World War I did to his psyche, right? That is like a through line throughout every season. And I think the first couple seasons are really, really great. It kind of lagged in the middle, but I think it's picked up some steam here toward the end. And I think this is going to be, if this is not the last season, I think the next one probably will be. Okay. But I would highly recommend that show.
Yeah. I mean, Cillian Murphy, I remember seeing him in 28 Days Later, like 20 years ago. And I was like, I like this guy. And then, he's done some more notable stuff. Some of... obviously, Batman Begins, he was big in that, and he became a little more well-known. But everything he's in, that dude just brings it.
Yeah, no, he's phenomenal in the show. All
right, good stuff. Well, man, look,
I would highly recommend it.
I'm gonna once I find some time, I'm gonna do it. Luke, man, I apologize that we had to start late, and I might have been a little more distracted in our interview than I normally am. Based on a lot of technical things happening in here. But I'm glad we were able to get you on, and I appreciate you taking the time, man. And everybody, I'm sure you guys are all already doing it, but make sure you're following Luke on Twitter at BYLukeJohnson. Read all the stuff he's putting out over at NOLA.com, the Times-Picayune / the New Orleans Advocate, covering the Saints on the reg. I guess that's what the kids say these days. I shouldn't have done that. I don't know where that came from. On an everyday basis. I mean, I don't know when I've never said that in my life. I'm 40. I have no idea where that came from. Luke, man, I appreciate it, man. Let's do it again sometime next month, man. All the best.
Yeah, sounds good to me, man. And please pass my regards to Bob Marlin and Gary Broadhead. I see they're coming on after me. Yeah. Well, we're gonna do our best to get those on, but I will absolutely do it. Thank you, Luke. All right, thanks, man. Thank you.